I am on my way to go visit with Mr. Michael Shoen, and I'm excited for many reasons. One is he happens to own the last Shelby Cobra prototype, one of one, designed and built, I guess, in 1967 to be a 1968 model. Yeah, 1968. This was this car was on multiple magazine covers, but yet somehow today relatively obscure. I want to learn more about it and crawl around it, look at it. I'm super excited. Also, Michael Shoen has also written a book. He is somewhat of a serious Shelby and Cobra expert. He's owned many. He was a friend of Carroll Shelby, and he has an impressive amount of documentation from the days of the Ford versus Ferrari, or the Carroll Shelby versus Enzo Ferrari days in the early to mid 60s. And I'm going to learn more about that. I'm so excited about this. Happy to have you along, and let's see what happens, and I'll report back to you. Here we go.
My name is Michael Shoen, and the car is the 1968 LoneStar.
When you first personally became interested in cars and the car world?
I mean, I liked the idea of mobility. I got to drive a tractor and a truck when I was like 10 years old with my grandfather. And a neighbor on the farm, he had a little 3/4 midget, and I, of course, figured I could never do anything like that. That was not within my scope of possibility. But I was interested in airplanes first, and then I saw my first Cobra in 1967 in December, and I could see right away, because I'd been working with performance airplanes. Most airplanes are just pure performance, and I could see the car was pure performance. This car came about through, you'd have to say, the inertia of what you call the true believers in Shelby American and people associated with Shelby American, including John Wire in England, who was a true believer in high-performance cars. And so when Ford started to take Shelby over at the end of 1964, they had a controlling interest in the board of directors. And they started calling them the big decisions. And when they got the 427 Cobra built after the 289 Cobra, then they naturally thought, well, what's going to be the next Cobra? So they cast around for ideas, and they ended up with this car ultimately. There's a big difference between this car and the first 289 Cobra, because the 289 Cobra was Carroll Shelby's personal dream and idea that he got involved with every detail. And by the time you got to the 427 Cobra, he lost a little bit of control. And then the replacement for it, which was to be this car, it was just something that was happening that it wasn't his dream. He was fully involved and committed to racing the Ford GTs and the Mustangs. And so this car sort of died at the same time that the whole Shelby American died. It just didn't happen early enough, and because it was a totally different concept than the 289 and the 427 Cobra. It was really the concept of a supercar and a super high performance car, and Shelby was above all an entrepreneur and a businessman, and he knew he wasn't going to make money with this thing. I have no doubt that it's going to be more or less comparable to a 289 GT40. The same guy, the chief engineer on the Mark III GT40, was the same guy that designed this car. He actually designed the higher performance GT40 called the GT40 Mirage. And he also designed the nose for the both the Mark II GT40 and the Racing Mark I.
Wow.
So he had the background to make this work.
Do you recall his name?
Oh yeah, it's Len Bailey, B-A-I-L-E-Y. And he also did for Ford a car called the GT70, which was a rally car which never made it into production. And he also did a super high, extremely high performance for Ford in England called the F3L P68. And that was a car that would run with, say, the Mark IV Ford or the P4 Ferrari, a super high performance car. But that again was part of the problem with this car, was that the people that were really involved deeply in the design of it, they were true believers. They were not entrepreneurs and businessmen like Shelby was. You know, and Shelby used to tell me how much he disliked this car because you had to step over the sill to get into it. And of course, that's almost every super high performance car today is like that. But Shelby was first and foremost a guy who was a promoter, who was making something happen, and he knew that this had a very limited appeal. I think I bought this car about 1975, and I bought it in sort of downtown Hollywood area, Los Angeles. And I remember I drove it around. I mean, you know, I don't know, 4, 5, 10, 20 blocks, and I could see it was a high performance car. It was going to work. And I knew what it was anyway, so I knew that with some work, it would be a high performance car. It just that Shelby had never really developed the car. This car came over in June of 1967 as a completed vehicle. And if you remember, it was June 1967 that Shelby, with the Mark IV Ford and Dan Gurney and A.J. Foyt, won Le Mans for the second consecutive time. And at that point, everybody that Shelby's knew that win, lose, or draw at Le Mans, the racing of all these fancy prototypes was over. They were going to race the Mustang. And so really, the whole Cobra concept and super high performance concept, that was over by the time this car was finished.
When you say came over, where was it actually built?
It was built in England. The guy that built it was a metal fabricator that did most of the metal, did all of the metal pieces for the GT40. John Wire was involved to the extent that he was sort of helping Shelby execute it, manage it, as Wire had done with other things. It's not very well known, but John Wire helped Shelby a lot. He was what you call not an entrepreneur, but a businessman and a manager and a guy who could organize and get things executed. He was, and he was also a true believer for sure, John Wire.
Yeah. So for the true believers, it sounds like they had a little more of a romantic concept of the car versus the business working, I guess.
Absolutely. That was the problem with this guy, the designer, Len Bailey. He was always ready to sacrifice practicality for performance. But you know, now that's not uncommon today because you've got a lot of the supercars. But with the advance of technology, you know, the supercar is less unpractical today.
Right.
But this car, if you look at it, the GT40 Mark I, Len Bailey as a designer, he was one of the engineers on that. Then the GT40 Mark II, he was the guy who designed the successful nose on that. The GT40 Mark III, he was the designer on the blueprints for that car. And then the Mirage GT40, he was the designer on that. So this car came after the Mirage. So here you've got a continuum of 4 variants of a GT40. And so that's basically the layout and the arrangement of this car is simply a GT40.
So what was the condition of this car when you got it, and what have you done since?
Well, I ran into financial difficulty in the late 80s and 90s. And so I put it up for sale in Road and Track for $100,000, and I don't think I had one inquiry. So, or maybe it was, I think that was a price, you know. And it was needed a major restoration. And then we got the restoration begun about, I think, I'm trying to remember, about 2003 with my friend Jeff Howard. And the car had a lot of different problems. The chief problem was, the chief problem was that, and I think Jeff would confirm this, that it was a concept prototype. There's a thing called a production prototype, which this car was not. And so they hadn't productionized it, made everything work so you could take the transmission out quick and take the engine out quick and get access to, you know, the radiator cap easily, and so that you can refill the reservoirs for the brake and the clutch fluid. You know, all these things were thrown together. The guys who put this car together were GOM Metal Development, GOMM Metal Development, and Maurice GOM was a famous guy in England because he was building whatever, you know, everybody built the part of car they build out of metal, these super duper race cars. He did it in England. Wow. And so, but he was used to building race cars, and to his credit, they put this thing together really quick. And so the restoration of this thing, it had the whole right front fender had been damaged, and the front bumper was lost, and the right front fender had been remade out of steel, and there were, you know, the fuel cells were garbage, they had rotted out, and et cetera, et cetera. There were a lot of problems with the car, but the fundamental problem was that it wasn't made as a production car. Like, how do you take the windshield out? How do you get access to the back of the instruments? And so Jeff Howard solved all these problems. You know, he really did the re-engineering and the continual work. See, that's what Shelby did with the AC-Ace and Remington and all those guys that were brilliant, Ken Miles. So they took the AC-Ace, which in no way was a car that was going to go fast, and they made it into a Cobra. And one thing broke, one thing was bad, they kept replacing it, making it better, making it more intelligently designed, and making it simpler. So that was never done with this car. By the time we started working on it, Ken Miles was dead, the development driver, and Phil Remington was way too old and too busy, you know, and I never thought of giving it to Phil Remington. He probably would have turned me down. Yeah, I think that restoration, we had like 15 years in it, no kidding. And there's a lot of money goes with that too, and Jeff does a great job, and he's mentally tough, because when you come to a problem like, oh, okay, the brake and the clutch reservoirs are located under the cowl where you can't refill them. You know? So what do? Do you give up? Yeah. And Jeff wouldn't give up. He just kept working on stuff. Yeah. And he was happy to see it go.
I'm sure you learned a lot about this car after you purchased it.
Yes.
What are some of the surprises that you learned about this car since you've owned it?
Well, I was surprised because Shelby used to cuss it out. Because, you know, we were friends, and, you know, he was ticked that it wasn't a Cobra, you know. But Shelby was such an entrepreneur that he was always racing to the next project, you know. Yeah. I was surprised that there was no way to take the engine out. So, you know, that... So,
basic problem.
yeah, that was a problem. Jeff solved those problems.
Okay.
There was one problem he didn't solve that here's one I was surprised with.
Okay.
This is a good one. This is a great story from my perspective. So I keep telling Jeff, drive the sucker, drive it. I want you to, because I knew how important development was.
Right.
And so by this time, Jeff was just frightened because he felt the car was so valuable, he didn't want to drive it and mess it up. He said,
Right.
drive it around the lake, because he had this little road around this lake he lives by. And so he finally drove it, and I thought, that's okay. Well, it comes back, I get in it and drive. It's absolutely undrivable. And the reason is that Len Bailey, as an afterthought, because the car was hard to get into, he made the steering wheel a tilt wheel. And all he did to tilt the wheel was put simply a universal joint, about 6 inches forward of the wheel. Well, if you think about it, a regular universal joint has a lot of slop in it.
Right.
So if you're steering a steering wheel that has a lot of slop, and you're in a high performance car, if you're in a golf cart, it's okay.
Right.
But this thing was darting all over. And so I solved that one. I claimed the Phil Remington Award on that, or the Ken Miles Award on that. But and then we got Chris Harrison, who lives in the area in Maricopa County. Between him and I, he got that fixed, and we figured out how to cool it, use it without any real changes in the design. Well, actually, we put a different nose outlet in the nose. It had the twin nostrils of the original Mark I GT40 in it.
Okay.
And so I had talked to Len Bailey about this and other things before he died, and of course he was the one that put the open air exit in the Mark II nose.
Okay.
So he was happy it wasn't a design screw up if we put an open air
Right.
exit. So we got the thing working with the original radiator and all the original dimensions to cool pretty well.
So now that you have it and you've got, a lot of these bugs worked out, what is your favorite thing about owning this car now? What do you like about it?
Oh, I don't know. Well, I'll tell you the thing. I'm proud that I did a lot of stuff with the original Shelby race cars,
Mm-hmm.
and I did a lot of stuff to establish their history and to get the ball rolling ball of interest rolling in it, and I'm proud of that, and I'm proud that. That this last car, which really embodied the dream of the true believers, that I got this thing finished what you call according to the way it was designed, and made it work, and work as good as it could. I'm happy I got it done. My wife likes this car a lot because it's a beautiful car, and she was the one who told me that I couldn't sell it after I put the ad in Road and Track. Maybe that's why it wouldn't sell. And she said, you're not going to sell that car, because we had financial challenges, but she said, you're not selling that, because I couldn't get any money for it anyway. But it's really the last Cobra. I used to have a ton of Cobras, and I've got one now. I'm happy that I've got one. I'm happy I can see one.